The berry basket slipped from Beatrice Mitchell's fingers when the mountain of a man stepped out from between the pine trees. His rifle held loose in one massive hand, and his green eyes fixed on her like she was a deer caught in an open meadow. It was August of 1872, and Beatrice had been in California for exactly 3 weeks, living in a cramped boarding house in San Pedro with her aunt, while trying to find respectable work as a seamstress. The coastal town had proven more expensive than anticipated, and when her aunt mentioned that wild berries grew in the foothills above the settlement, Beatrice had seen an opportunity to save a few precious coins on food. She had not expected to wander onto private land. She certainly had not expected to encounter a man who looked like he had been carved from the very mountains themselves. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed impossibly broad beneath his worn leather vest. His shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle, and his chest strained against the fabric with each breath. Dark hair fell past his collar, slightly unkempt but clean, and his jaw was covered with several days' worth of stubble. Everything about him spoke of raw strength and wilderness living, from the knife strapped to his belt to the way he moved with absolute confidence through the uneven terrain. "I am so very sorry," Beatrice said quickly, her voice higher than usual with nervousness. She bent to retrieve her basket, acutely aware of how she must look in her faded calico dress and bonnet, fingers stained purple from the berries she had been picking for the past hour. "I did not realize this was private property. I will leave immediately, and I promise I will not return." The man studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to her complete surprise, the corners of his mouth lifted into something that might have been the beginning of a smile. "How many berries you got there?" His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together but not unkind. Beatrice glanced down at her half-filled basket. "Not many, I am afraid. Perhaps 2 cups worth." He made a sound that could have been approval or amusement. "That patch you have been picking is one of the best on the property. Blackberries grow thick there because of the spring that runs underground. You can come back tomorrow if you want. Day after that too. Pick as much as you can carry." She stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. "I beg your pardon. This is my land," he said, gesturing with his free hand to encompass the rolling hills and pine forests that stretched in every direction. "Isaiah Ashford, and if you are going to trespass, you might as well do it properly. Those berries will go to waste otherwise. Bears and birds will eat them, but I would rather see them go to someone who needs them." Beatrice felt her cheeks warm with a mixture of embarrassment and something else she could not quite name. No one had shown her such casual kindness since she had arrived in California. "That is very generous of you, Mr. Ashford. I am Beatrice Mitchell. I arrived in San Pedro 3 weeks ago with my aunt." Isaiah nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. She noticed they were the color of pine needles in summer, bright and alive against his sun-bronzed skin. "Saw you in town last week. You were coming out of the general store." The thought that he had noticed her sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. "I did not see you. Most people do not notice me unless I want them to." He shifted his rifle to his other hand. "You planning to pick more today?" "I had intended to, before I realized I was trespassing." "Then get to it. Sun will be setting in a few hours and you do not want to be walking back to town in the dark. Mountain lions hunt at dusk." Beatrice swallowed hard at that information but nodded. She expected him to leave, to return to whatever business had brought him out here in the first place, but instead he leaned against a nearby pine tree and watched as she returned to the berry bushes. His presence should have made her nervous, but instead she found it oddly comforting. There was something solid and dependable about him, like the mountains themselves. "You come from back east," he asked after a few minutes of silence. Pennsylvania, she confirmed, carefully picking the ripest berries and dropping them into her basket. My aunt moved here 2 years ago after her husband passed. She wrote to say there were opportunities for women willing to work hard. And are there? Beatrice paused, considering her answer. Fewer than she suggested. Most of the merchants in San Pedro already have seamstresses, and the ones who do not are not interested in hiring someone without local references. Isaiah made that grinding stone sound again. People in town are suspicious of outsiders. They will warm up to you eventually. I hope you are right. My savings will not last forever. She had not meant to reveal quite so much to a stranger, but something about him invited honesty. Perhaps it was the way he listened, fully present and attentive, without the dismissive attitude so many men affected when women spoke. You any good with needle and thread? Very good, she said without false modesty. I apprenticed with one of the finest dressmakers in Philadelphia for 4 years. Then they are fools for not hiring you. He pushed away from the tree. I have to check my traps before dark. You remember what I said about coming back. This time of year, those bushes will have fresh berries every few days. Pick as much as you want. Thank you, Mr. Ashford, truly. He touched 2 fingers to his forehead in a casual salute, then turned and walked into the forest with the silent grace of someone who belonged there completely. Beatrice watched him go, her heart beating faster than could be explained by simple gratitude. Over the next 2 weeks, Beatrice returned to Isaiah's land 6 times. She never saw him on those visits, though sometimes she felt certain he was nearby, watching from between the trees to ensure she was safe. Each time she came, she found the berry bushes laden with fruit, and each time she filled her basket to overflowing. Her aunt was delighted with the bounty, using the berries for pies and preserves that stretched their meager food budget considerably. On her 7th visit, Isaiah was waiting for her at the edge of his property, sitting on a fallen log with his rifle across his knees. He stood when he saw her approaching, and Beatrice felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Morning, Miss Mitchell. Good morning, Mr. Ashford. She smiled at him, pleased to see him again. I was beginning to think you were avoiding me. Been watching to make sure you were safe. Had a mother bear with 2 cubs in the area last week. She moved on yesterday. He gestured toward the berry bushes. Thought I should let you know it is clear. The idea that he had been protecting her, even from a distance, made warmth spread through her chest. That was very thoughtful. Also wanted to talk to you about something. He shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. You still looking for work? Yes, though I am beginning to lose hope. I have a proposition. Not proper work exactly, but it would pay. He met her eyes directly. My clothes are falling apart. I am fair with leather and can mend my own gear well enough, but regular sewing is not a skill I ever learned. If you could patch my shirts and maybe make me a new pair of trousers, I would pay you $2. $2 was more than fair payment for such work. More importantly, it was $2 she desperately needed. I would be happy to help, Mr. Ashford. Though I should warn you that I would need to take your measurements for the trousers. Something flickered in his eyes that might have been amusement. I trust you to be professional, Miss Mitchell. Then I accept your offer. Should I come to your home? He hesitated. I live pretty far up in the mountains. It is not an easy walk for someone not used to the terrain. Why do you not give me your address in San Pedro, and I will bring the clothes to you tomorrow afternoon? They made the arrangements, and Beatrice picked berries while Isaiah sat on his log and cleaned his rifle, occasionally making observations about the weather or the wildlife he had seen recently. His voice was soothing in its steadiness, and Beatrice found herself lingering longer than necessary, reluctant to end their time together. When she finally started back toward town, her basket heavy with berries and her heart lighter than it had been in weeks, she could not stop thinking about the mountain man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. She told herself it was simple gratitude, nothing more, but the way her pulse quickened when she thought of seeing him again suggested otherwise. Isaiah arrived at her aunt's boarding house precisely at 2 o'clock the following afternoon, looking even larger and more out of place in the cramped parlor than Beatrice had imagined. Her Aunt Margaret took one look at him and found an urgent reason to visit the neighbors, leaving them alone with a pointed glance that made Beatrice's cheeks burn. "I brought everything I own that needs mending," Isaiah said, setting a bundle of clothes on the table. "Plus fabric for the trousers, if you think this will work." Beatrice examined the heavy canvas he had brought and nodded approvingly. "This is perfect for work trousers. Very durable." She unfolded the clothes he wanted mended and had to suppress a gasp. Nearly every shirt had tears or holes, and some were so worn she doubted they could be salvaged. "Mr. Ashford, how long have you been wearing these?" "5 years, maybe 6. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I do not get to town often, and when I do, clothes shopping is not high on my list." "I can see that." She held up a shirt that was more whole than fabric. "Some of these are beyond repair, I am afraid. They have simply worn through too completely. Can you make me some new ones?" "I could, but I would need fabric and time, and it would cost more than $2. Isaiah pulled a leather pouch from his belt and set it on the table with a solid thunk. "I have been trapping and hunting up in the mountains for 10 years, Miss Mitchell. I do not spend much, so I have saved most of what I earn. Money is not a problem. What would you need?" They spent the next hour discussing fabrics, cuts, and styles. Beatrice took his measurements, trying to remain professional even as she became acutely aware of just how solid and powerful his body was. His chest was broad and heavily muscled, his arms thick with strength earned from years of physical labor. When she had to measure his shoulders, standing close enough to smell the clean scent of pine and leather that clung to him, she found her hands trembling slightly. If Isaiah noticed her reaction, he was gentleman enough not to mention it. He stood perfectly still while she worked, answering her questions about how he preferred his clothes to fit and what he needed them to endure. "You do a lot of hard work," she observed, running the measuring tape along his arm. "Your body shows it. Mountain living is not for the weak." His voice was low, and when she glanced up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "But I like it. Like the solitude and the simplicity. Town feels too crowded and noisy after a few hours. I can understand that, though I confess I have never lived anywhere quite so isolated. Does it not get lonely?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Sometimes. Especially in winter when the snow is deep, and I do not see another soul for weeks at a time." Beatrice finished her measurements and stepped back, needing the distance to clear her head. "Well, based on what we have discussed, I estimate it will take me about 3 weeks to complete everything. 2 new shirts, 2 pairs of trousers, and repairs on the items that can be salvaged. Does that suit you?" "More than suits me. You need an advance for the fabric." "That would be helpful, yes." Isaiah counted out bills from his pouch, far more than she had expected. When she tried to protest that it was too much, he shook his head. "Consider it payment for the work you have already done, letting me pick berries all these weeks without asking for anything in return." "But you did not ask for payment. You offered the berries freely." "And now I am offering this freely. Take it, Miss Mitchell. I have more than I need, and you clearly do not." There was no pity in his voice, only practical kindness, and after a moment Beatrice accepted the money with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Mr. Ashford. This is very generous. Just Isaiah. Mr. Ashford makes me feel like my father. Then you must call me Beatrice. He smiled at that, a full, genuine smile that transformed his rough features into something surprisingly handsome. Beatrice. Pretty name for a pretty woman. The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly, left her flustered and pleased in equal measure. "I will have the first shirt and trousers ready in a week," she managed to say. "You can come by to try them on and I will make any needed adjustments. I will be here." After he left, Beatrice stood in the empty parlor, holding the money and feeling like her life had shifted in some fundamental way. Her aunt returned 15 minutes later wearing a knowing expression. "Well," Margaret said, "that is quite a man." "He is a client, Aunt Margaret, nothing more." "Of course, dear. And I suppose you always blush like a schoolgirl when discussing business with clients." Beatrice could not think of a single response to that, so she focused on sorting through Isaiah's clothes instead, trying to ignore the way her hands wanted to linger on the fabric that had touched his skin. True to her word, Beatrice had the first shirt and pair of trousers completed 1 week later. She had worked on them every evening after spending her days searching for other employment, pouring all her skill and care into every seam. The shirt was made from sturdy cotton in a deep blue that she thought would bring out the color of Isaiah's eyes, and the trousers were reinforced at every stress point to handle the demands of mountain living. Isaiah arrived exactly when expected, and when he tried on the clothes, Beatrice felt a surge of satisfaction at how perfectly they fit. The shirt stretched across his broad chest and shoulders without pulling, and the trousers sat comfortably at his waist while allowing full freedom of movement. "These are the finest clothes I have ever owned," he said, examining the even stitches and careful finishing work. "You are not exaggerating about your skills. I am glad you are pleased. I can have the rest completed within 2 weeks. No rush." He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like to see where those berries grow? I mean, properly see it in daylight with someone to point out the good spots." Beatrice knew she should decline. It would not be proper to spend time alone with a man she barely knew, no matter how much she wanted to accept. But there was something in Isaiah's expression, a hopefulness mixed with uncertainty, that made the refusal die on her lips. "I would like that very much." They arranged to meet the following Sunday afternoon, and when the day arrived, Beatrice found herself taking extra care with her appearance. She told herself it was simply a matter of wanting to look presentable, nothing more, but she could not quite convince herself of that lie. Isaiah was waiting for her at the base of the trail that led up into his property, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. He had trimmed his beard slightly and was wearing the new shirt she had made, which gave her an absurd amount of pleasure. "Ready for a walk?" he asked. "Lead the way." As they climbed higher into the foothills, Isaiah pointed out various plants and landmarks, sharing his knowledge with an enthusiasm that surprised her. He showed her which mushrooms were safe to eat and which would kill her within hours, where to find wild onions and herbs, and how to read the signs that animals left behind. His connection to this land was obvious in every word and gesture, and Beatrice found herself captivated by his passion. "You really love it up here," she said as they reached a small meadow filled with wildflowers. "Only place I have ever felt like I truly belonged." He looked out over the view of San Pedro far below, the ocean glittering in the distance. "My father wanted me to be a banker like him, back in Missouri. Spent my whole childhood trapped in offices and stuffy parlors, wearing uncomfortable clothes and pretending to care about money and social standing. When I turned 20, I told him I was heading west, and I never looked back." "Do you regret it, leaving your family?" Isaiah considered the question seriously. I regret that I hurt my mother. She cried when I left, but I do not regret the choice. If I had stayed, I would have withered away like a plant without sunlight. Here I am alive." Beatrice understood that feeling more than she could easily express. "I think I know what you mean. In Philadelphia, there were so many rules about what a woman could do, who she could speak to, how she should behave. It was suffocating. When my aunt wrote to say California was different, more open, I jumped at the chance to leave." "And is it different?" "Yes," she said slowly. "Though not always in the ways I expected. There is more freedom in some ways, but also more danger and uncertainty. I have not quite decided if the trade is worth it. Give it time. California grows on you." They spent another hour exploring, and Isaiah showed her 3 more patches of berry bushes she had not known existed, all laden with fruit. He helped her fill her basket, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he selected only the ripest berries. When they finally started back down the mountain, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Thank you for today," Beatrice said when they reached the bottom of the trail. "It was lovely. Would you like to do it again? Next Sunday, maybe?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I would like that very much." Over the following weeks, Sunday afternoon walks became a regular occurrence. Isaiah always had something new to show her, some hidden corner of his property or interesting piece of wilderness lore. Beatrice brought him completed sections of his clothing order, and he always praised her work with a sincerity that made her glow with pride. They talked about everything during those walks. Isaiah told her about his years in the mountains, the harsh winters and dangerous encounters with wildlife, but also the beauty and peace he had found in solitude. Beatrice shared stories of her apprenticeship in Philadelphia, the demanding dressmaker who had trained her, and her dreams of one day opening her own shop. "You will do it," Isaiah said with absolute confidence during one of their walks. "You have the skill and the determination. You just need the right opportunity. Opportunities have been scarce. They come when you least expect them. Trust me on that." As August turned to September, Beatrice realized she was falling in love with Isaiah Ashford. It was not something she had planned or even wanted, knowing how complicated such feelings could make her life, but love did not ask for permission. She loved the way he listened when she spoke, giving her his complete attention as if her words were the most important thing in the world. She loved his quiet strength and the gentleness he showed to small creatures they encountered on their walks. She loved how safe she felt in his presence, as if nothing bad could touch her when he was near. What she did not know was whether he felt the same way. Isaiah was unfailingly kind and attentive, but he never made any move to suggest his feelings went beyond friendship. He never tried to hold her hand or steal a kiss, never made romantic declarations or flowery compliments. Beatrice told herself she should be grateful for his respect, but part of her wished he would give her some sign that she was not alone in her feelings. The answer came on a Sunday in late September, when they had climbed to one of Isaiah's favorite spots, a rocky outcrop that provided a breathtaking view of the entire valley. They sat side by side on the sun-warmed stone, sharing the lunch Beatrice had packed, and for a while neither of them spoke. "I need to tell you something," Isaiah said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "But I do not want to make you uncomfortable or ruin what we have." Beatrice's heart began to race. "You can tell me anything." He turned to look at her, his green eyes intense and vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I am in love with you, Beatrice. Have been for weeks now, maybe since that first day when you dropped your berry basket and looked at me like I was some kind of wild animal. I know I am not the kind of man a woman like you should want. I live in the mountains like a hermit, I have no social graces, and I cannot offer you the life you probably dreamed of. but I love you, and I needed you to know that, even if you do not feel the same way." For a moment, Beatrice could only stare at him, joy and relief flooding through her in equal measure. Then she reached out and took his hand, marveling at how her fingers disappeared in his large, calloused palm. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I have been terrified to admit it, afraid I was alone in my feelings. Isaiah, you are exactly the kind of man I want. You are kind and honest and strong, and you make me feel more alive than I have ever felt before." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise over the mountains, brilliant and transformative. "You mean that? Every word." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with a reverence that made her breath catch. "I want to court you properly. Want to marry you if you will have me. I know my proposal is not much, living up in the mountains away from town, but I would build you a proper house with room for a sewing shop. I would do everything in my power to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Beatrice said, moving closer to him. "And I do not need a life in town, I need you." Isaiah cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite his strength. "Can I kiss you, please?" He kissed her softly at first, as if she were something precious and fragile, but when Beatrice pressed closer and wrapped her arms around his neck, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of long-denied desire and infinite tenderness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Beatrice rested her forehead against his chest and felt his heart pounding as rapidly as her own. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Isaiah admitted, his arms tight around her. "So have I." They sat on the outcrop until the sun began to set, making plans for their future and stealing kisses between declarations of love. By the time Isaiah walked Beatrice back to town, they were engaged, and Beatrice felt like she was floating several inches above the ground. Her aunt took the news with surprising calmness. "I knew this was coming," Margaret said with a satisfied smile. "That man has been looking at you like you hung the moon since the first time he came to the house. You did not think to mention that." Some things a woman needs to figure out for herself. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. Isaiah came to town more frequently, enduring the crowds and noise to spend time with Beatrice. He met with the local minister to arrange their wedding, and hired a carpenter to begin building an addition to his mountain cabin that would serve as Beatrice's sewing room. She completed his clothing order and began work on her wedding dress, a simple but elegant design in cream-colored silk that she had been saving for years. They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in November, giving them enough time to complete preparations, but not so long that they had to endure an extended engagement. Isaiah's impatience to make her his wife was both flattering and endearing, and Beatrice had to admit she shared his eagerness. "I have waited my whole life to find someone like you," he told her one evening as they sat on her aunt's porch. "I do not want to wait any longer than necessary. 2 months is hardly an eternity. It feels like one." As the wedding approached, Beatrice began to understand just how much Isaiah was respected in the community, despite his solitary lifestyle. People she had never met stopped her in the street to offer congratulations and share stories about times Isaiah had helped them. He had apparently pulled a farmer's cart out of a ditch during a rainstorm, tracked down a merchant's lost horse, and spent 3 days searching for a child who had wandered away from town, refusing any payment for his efforts. "You never mentioned any of this," she said when she asked him about it. He shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. "It is just what you do for neighbors. Most people would disagree. Then most people have strange priorities." The wedding took place on a clear November morning with the autumn sun streaming through the church windows. Beatrice wore her silk dress, and carried a bouquet of the last wildflowers of the season, which Isaiah had climbed high into the mountains to find for her. He wore a new suit she had made for him, dark wool that emphasized his powerful build, and when she walked down the aisle and saw the love and wonder in his eyes, she knew she was making exactly the right choice. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Isaiah kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation sighed audibly. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Margaret providing food and drink for the small gathering of friends and neighbors who came to celebrate. "Ready to see your new home?" Isaiah asked as the sun began to set and the party wound down. "More than ready." He had borrowed a wagon for the occasion, and they rode up into the mountains together as the stars began to appear overhead. Beatrice leaned against her husband's solid warmth, marveling at how perfectly right it felt to call him that. The cabin was larger than she had expected, built from solid logs with a stone chimney and glass windows that would let in the morning light. Isaiah had clearly spent weeks preparing for her arrival. The main room held a table and chairs he had built himself, a rocking chair positioned near the fireplace, and colorful rugs that added warmth to the wooden floors. The bedroom was small but cozy, with a real bed instead of the rough cot he had previously slept on. But it was the addition that took her breath away. The sewing room was spacious and well lit, with windows on 2 walls and shelves already built to hold fabric and supplies. A beautiful sewing table sat in the center, positioned to catch the best light, and the walls had been painted a soft cream color that made the space feel welcoming and professional. "Isaiah," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes, "this is perfect. You like it?" He sounded anxious, as if there was any possibility she would not be thrilled. "I love it. I love all of it. And I love you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply. "I love you too, Beatrice Ashford." Their wedding night was everything she had hoped for and more. Isaiah was patient and gentle, taking his time to ensure her comfort and pleasure. His hands, so skilled at surviving in the wilderness, proved equally skilled at bringing her body to life with sensations she had never experienced before. They learned each other slowly, building a fire between them that burned away any lingering awkwardness or uncertainty. Afterward, as they lay tangled together beneath the quilts, Beatrice felt a contentment so profound it was almost frightening. How had she gotten so lucky to find a man who loved her so completely? "What are you thinking?" Isaiah asked, his voice rumbling in his chest where her head rested. "That I am the happiest woman in California." "Good. That is exactly what I was aiming for." She tilted her head to kiss his jaw. "You succeeded." Their first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Beatrice had to learn how to live in the mountains, how to read the weather and preserve food for winter, how to stay safe when Isaiah was away checking his trap lines. Isaiah had to learn how to share his space and his life, to consider another person's needs and preferences in every decision. But they learned together, with patience and humor, and a deep well of love to draw from. Beatrice discovered that she loved mountain life far more than she had expected. The solitude that might have driven another woman mad felt peaceful to her, a chance to focus on her sewing without the constant interruption and judgment of society. She took on projects from women in San Pedro, using the money she earned to buy supplies and save toward opening a proper shop one day. Isaiah, for his part, seemed to bloom with her presence in his life. He smiled more readily and talked more freely, no longer the silent hermit people in town had known. He brought her small gifts from his time in the wilderness, interesting stones, bird feathers, once a piece of honeycomb from a wild hive that he had risked bee stings to obtain because he knew she loved honey. Winter came early that year, with snow falling in mid-November and piling up around the cabin in drifts taller than Beatrice. Isaiah had prepared well, though, filling the root cellar with preserved food and stacking firewood against the cabin walls. They spent the long evenings by the fire, with Beatrice sewing and Isaiah carving or mending his equipment, comfortable in companionable silence or easy conversation. On the nights when the wind howled and the snow fell so thick they could not see 10 feet beyond the windows, they went to bed early and found warmth in each other's arms, building heat between them that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth. Spring arrived in March, melting the snow and turning the mountains green with new growth. Beatrice ventured out onto the land with increasing confidence, learning which plants were edible and where the best fishing spots could be found. Isaiah taught her to shoot his rifle, insisting that she needed to know how to protect herself when he was away. "I do not like leaving you alone," he admitted one morning as he prepared to check his trap lines. "But I have to bring in money, and you are alone sometimes." "I will be fine," she assured him. "You have taught me well." She proved herself one afternoon in April when a bear wandered too close to the cabin while Isaiah was gone. Beatrice fired a warning shot that sent the animal lumbering back into the forest, then calmly reloaded the rifle and went back to her sewing. When Isaiah returned, and she told him what had happened, the pride in his eyes was worth more than any amount of praise. "You are a mountain woman now," he said, pulling her close. "I suppose I am." In May, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. She had suspected it for a few weeks, but when her monthlies failed to arrive for the 3rd month in a row and she began experiencing morning sickness, there was no more doubt. She told Isaiah that evening, watching his face carefully to gauge his reaction. For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then his face split into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably echoed clear down to San Pedro. He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests that he would make her dizzy. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly. "You are going to be a mother and I am going to be a father. Are you happy?" Happy does not even begin to cover it. "Beatrice, you have given me everything I never knew I wanted." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat made Beatrice uncomfortable, and there were days when the morning sickness lasted well into the afternoon. But Isaiah was attentive to her every need, adjusting his schedule so he was never gone for more than a few hours at a time. He brought her wild ginger to settle her stomach and made sure she rested even when she insisted she was fine. As her belly swelled, he talked to the baby constantly, telling stories about the mountains and promising to teach their child everything he knew about surviving in the wilderness. Beatrice would rest her hands on her stomach and feel the baby kick in response to its father's voice, and her heart would overflow with love for both of them. The baby came on a cold February morning in 1874, arriving 3 weeks earlier than expected during a snowstorm that made getting to town impossible. Beatrice labored for 16 hours while Isaiah did his best to help, following the instructions she gasped out between contractions. He held her hand and let her squeeze until his bones ached, wiped her forehead with cool cloths, and told her over and over how strong she was, how proud he was, how much he loved her. When their son finally entered the world with a healthy wail, Isaiah cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the baby in clean blankets, tears streaming down his face. He placed the infant in Beatrice's arms and kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. "You are amazing," he said hoarsely. "Absolutely amazing." Beatrice looked down at their son, at his tiny perfect fingers and the dark hair plastered to his head, and felt a love so fierce it was almost painful. "He is beautiful, just like his mother." They named him Isaac, after Isaiah's grandfather, and he proved to be a healthy, happy baby who rarely cried unless he was hungry. Isaiah was a natural father, patient and gentle with his son in a way that made Beatrice fall even more deeply in love with her husband. He built a cradle that rocked with just a touch of his hand, and carved toys that Isaac would not be old enough to appreciate for years. The spring after Isaac was born, Beatrice received an unexpected visitor. A woman from San Francisco, elegant and refined, arrived at the cabin in a hired carriage, looking absurdly out of place in her fashionable dress and feathered hat. "Mrs. Ashford," the woman said. "My name is Isaiah Hartford. I was recently in San Pedro visiting my sister, and I saw a dress you made for the doctor's wife. When I complimented it, she told me you were responsible. I have been searching for a skilled dressmaker, and I wondered if you might be interested in taking commissions from ladies in San Francisco." Beatrice, holding Isaac on her hip and acutely aware of her simple work dress and flour-dusted apron, could hardly believe what she was hearing. "You came all this way to ask me that." "I did. Your work is exquisite, Mrs. Ashford. The construction, the finishing, the attention to detail, it is far superior to anything I have seen in San Francisco, and I know the best dressmakers in the city. If you are willing, I could recommend you to all my acquaintances. You would need to charge appropriately, of course. Ladies of quality expect to pay for quality work." Isaiah, who had been repairing a fence when Isaiah arrived, stepped up beside Beatrice. "That would mean a lot of work," he said quietly. "You sure you could handle it with Isaac to care for?" Beatrice looked at her husband, at the support and pride in his eyes, then at Isaiah Hartford with her offer of the opportunity Beatrice had been dreaming of for years. "I believe I could," she said slowly, "with help." "I will help," Isaiah said immediately. "Whatever you need." They invited Isaiah inside, and over tea and the cookies Beatrice had baked that morning, they discussed terms and logistics. Isaiah wanted 3 dresses to start, including one for an important social event in May. If those turned out well, she would recommend Beatrice to her friends. "I will pay half upfront for materials," Isaiah said, "and the other half upon delivery. Would $200 per dress be acceptable?" Beatrice nearly dropped her teacup. $200 was more than most people earned in 6 months. "That is very generous." "That is what your talent is worth. I expect only the finest work, of course, but I have no doubt you can deliver." After Isaiah left, Beatrice and Isaiah looked at each other in stunned silence. Then Isaiah let out a laugh and picked her up, spinning her around just as he had when she told him about the baby. "This is your chance," he said. "Everything you have been working toward." "I am terrified," she admitted. "You will be brilliant. You always are." She worked harder over the next 2 months than she had ever worked in her life. Isaiah took over most of the household tasks and cared for Isaac whenever possible so she could focus on sewing. She poured everything she had learned, every skill she had honed, into those 3 dresses. Each one was a masterpiece of design and construction, tailored perfectly to Isaiah's specifications, and finished with details that would make them stand out in any ballroom. When she delivered them to Isaiah in San Francisco, making the journey with Isaiah and Isaac in their wagon, Isaiah was effusive in her praise. She paid the remaining balance immediately and gave Beatrice a list of 12 other women who wanted to place orders. "You are about to become very busy," Isaiah said with a smile. "I hope you are ready." Over the next 2 years, Beatrice's reputation spread throughout San Francisco society. She could not keep up with all the orders she received and had to become selective about which commissions she accepted. The money she earned was substantial, more than enough to improve the cabin and buy Isaiah better equipment for his work. They saved carefully, planning for the future and for the children they hoped to have. Their second child, a daughter they named Bethany, arrived in December of 1876, and this time the birth was easier, with Isaiah calm and confident as he helped bring his daughter into the world. Bethany had her mother's dark hair and her father's green eyes, and she wrapped Isaiah around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. "I never knew my heart could hold this much," Isaiah said one evening, holding Bethany while Isaac played at his feet. "You have given me a family, Beatrice. A real family." "We gave it to each other," she corrected gently. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Isaiah continued his trapping and hunting, but he also began breeding horses, discovering he had a talent for it. The income from both businesses kept them secure, and when combined with Beatrice's dressmaking earnings, they were actually prosperous. In 1878, Isaiah surprised Beatrice by purchasing 20 acres of land adjacent to his property, expanding their holdings significantly. "Thought we might start a proper horse ranch," he explained. "Something to pass on to Isaac and Bethany when they are grown." "And any other children we might have?" Beatrice asked, one hand resting on her stomach where their third child was just beginning to show. Isaiah's face lit up. "You are pregnant again, 3 months along." Their third child, another son they named Ian, arrived in early 1879. He was the quietest of their children, content to watch the world with serious eyes, and he showed an early fascination with animals that promised he would follow in his father's footsteps. As the children grew, the cabin underwent multiple expansions. Isaiah built additional bedrooms and enlarged the sewing room so Beatrice could hire an assistant, a young woman from San Pedro named Catherine who showed real talent with a needle. The property became a real homestead, with a barn for the horses, chicken coops, and carefully tended gardens. Beatrice taught the children their letters and numbers, reading to them every evening and instilling in them a love of learning. Isaiah taught them to ride and track, to understand the rhythms of nature and respect the wilderness. Together, they raised children who were equally comfortable in a fancy parlor or camping under the stars. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaiah took Beatrice back to the outcrop where he had first told her he loved her. The children were spending the night with Aunt Margaret, giving them a rare evening alone, and they sat side by side watching the sunset just as they had all those years ago. "You ever regret it?" Isaiah asked. "Choosing this life over what you could have had in the city?" Beatrice thought of her thriving business, her beautiful children, the home they had built together on this mountain. Most of all, she thought of the man beside her, who had shown her that true strength came wrapped in gentleness, that love could be both passionate and peaceful, that home was not a place but a person. "Not for a single second," she said, taking his hand. "You told me once that California grows on you. You were right, but it is not California I could not live without. It is you." He kissed her softly, a kiss that still made her heart race after 10 years of marriage. "I love you, Beatrice Ashford, more every day. And I love you, Isaiah, always." As they sat together watching the stars emerge, Beatrice thought back to that August afternoon when she had been caught picking berries on his land. She had apologized, ready to flee, certain she was in trouble. Instead, he had told her to pick more always. It was such a simple gesture, but it had changed everything. He had given her permission to take what she needed, to make herself at home on his land and in his life. He had offered abundance instead of scarcity, generosity instead of punishment. And from that small act of kindness, a love had grown that neither of them could have anticipated. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of mountain life. Isaac grew into a tall, strong young man who shared his father's love of the wilderness and his mother's artistic eye. He proved invaluable on the horse ranch, with an instinct for breeding that produced some of the finest horses in California. Bethany inherited her mother's skill with needle and thread, but she also showed a talent for business that meant she would likely take over the dressmaking enterprise one day. Ian, true to his quiet nature, became the horse trainer, able to gentle the wildest animals with patient persistence. In 1884, their fourth and final child arrived, a daughter they named Bella. She came as a surprise, born when Beatrice was 40 and had assumed her child-bearing years were behind her. Bella was a fiery, fearless child who seemed determined to do everything her older siblings could do, regardless of her size. "She reminds me of you," Isaiah said one afternoon, watching 5-year-old Bella chase after her teenage brothers on a horse that was far too large for her, refusing to let anything stop her. "I was never that wild," Beatrice protested. "No, but you had that same determination. Still do." Beatrice's dressmaking business had evolved over the years. She no longer took individual commissions, finding them too time-consuming, but she had begun designing patterns that other dressmakers could purchase and use. The patterns sold well throughout California and the Western Territories, providing steady income without requiring her constant attention. It meant she could focus more on her family while still maintaining her professional identity. Isaiah's horse ranch had become equally successful. The Ashford horses were known for their intelligence, strength, and steady temperament, and buyers came from as far as Oregon and Nevada to purchase breeding stock. He employed several men from San Pedro to help with the work, providing good jobs for people who might otherwise have struggled to feed their families. Through it all, Beatrice and Isaiah's love never wavered or diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and weathered storms. They still took walks together when they could, and they still made love with the same passion they had discovered on their wedding night, though now it was layered with decades of intimacy and knowing. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and the house was peaceful, they would sit together in the rocking chairs Isaiah had built, holding hands and watching the fire. No words were necessary. After so many years together, they could communicate entire conversations with a glance or a touch. When Isaac turned 22, he announced his engagement to a sweet young woman from San Pedro named Clara. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half the town in attendance, and Isaiah gave a toast that left many guests teary-eyed. "My son is a better man than I was at his age," Isaiah said. "But if he has half the happiness in marriage that I have had with Beatrice, he will be the luckiest man alive." Beatrice squeezed his hand under the table, her own eyes damp. After all these years, he could still make her feel like the most cherished woman in the world. Isaac and Clara built a house on the edge of the property, and within 2 years, they had given Beatrice and Isaiah their first grandchild, a sturdy boy with his grandfather's green eyes. Isaiah was besotted from the first moment, and watching him with his grandson reminded Beatrice of how he had been with their own children, patient, playful, endlessly loving. Bethany followed her brother into marriage at 20, wedding a banker from San Francisco who admired her business acumen as much as her beauty. They settled in the city, where Bethany opened a dress shop that became wildly successful, thanks in part to her mother's pattern designs and training. She and her husband had 3 daughters in quick succession, and Beatrice made the journey to San Francisco regularly to visit and dote on her granddaughters. Ian, true to his quiet nature, surprised everyone by falling in love with a widow from town who had a young son. He married Mary when he was 24, and he proved to be an excellent stepfather, patient and kind with the boy. They stayed on the ranch, building their own small house and starting a family that eventually included 2 more children. Only Bella seemed in no hurry to marry. At 18, she was more interested in horses and adventure than in settling down, much to her parents' amusement and occasional exasperation. "She will figure it out when she is ready," Isaiah said when Beatrice worried that Bella was too independent for her own good. "Just like her mother did. I was never that headstrong. You left everything you knew to come to California with no job and no prospects. You picked berries on a stranger's land. You married a mountain man and learned to live in the wilderness. Sweetheart, you are the most headstrong woman I have ever met. It is one of the many reasons I love you." As they entered their 60s, Isaiah and Beatrice began to slow down, though neither would admit it. Isaiah's joints ached on cold mornings, and Beatrice's eyes sometimes struggled with the fine detail work of sewing. But they were healthy and active, still taking their walks together and still running the ranch with help from their sons. In 1895, on their 24th wedding anniversary, Isaiah took Beatrice to the berry patch where they had first met. The bushes were still there, still producing fruit every summer, though now they belonged to Isaac and his family. "I come here sometimes," Isaiah admitted as they stood among the bushes, "when I need to remember how lucky I am. This is where my real life began." "Mine too," Beatrice said softly. "I came here desperate and afraid, thinking I would pick a few berries to save money on food. Instead, I found everything I had been looking for without knowing I was searching." "I knew from that first day," Isaiah said. "The moment you dropped your basket and looked at me with those wide eyes, something in my chest just clicked into place, like a puzzle piece finally finding where it belonged. You never told me that. I did not want to scare you away. Figured you would think I was crazy if I said I was falling in love before I even knew your name." Beatrice laughed, the sound as bright and joyful as it had been when she was 20. "I probably would have, but I felt it too, this pull toward you that I could not explain." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, remembering. Then Isaiah reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "I made you something," he said, handing it to her, "for our anniversary." Inside the box was a carving, intricate and beautiful, showing a woman with a berry basket and a man with a rifle standing together among the trees. The detail was exquisite, every line precise, and Beatrice could see the love that had gone into its creation. "Isaiah, this is beautiful." "It is us," he said. "That first day I wanted you to have something to remember where we started. As if I could ever forget." She kissed him softly. "Thank you. I will treasure it always." As the new century approached, Beatrice and Isaiah became the respected elders of the community. Young couples sought their advice on marriage, struggling ranchers asked Isaiah for help with horses, and women from all over California wrote to Beatrice for guidance on starting businesses. They gave freely of their time and wisdom, remembering how others had helped them in their early days. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends, in a party that lasted well into the night. Isaac made a toast to his parents, talking about the example they had set for all of them about what real love looked like. "My father taught me to be strong," Isaac said. "But more importantly, he taught me that true strength means protecting and cherishing those you love. My mother taught me that determination and skill can overcome any obstacle. Together, they taught me that love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. I am who I am because of them." Beatrice wiped away tears as Isaiah squeezed her hand. They had built something lasting, she realized. Not just a successful ranch or business, but a family rooted in love and respect. Their children had learned those lessons and were passing them on to their own children. The legacy they would leave was not measured in money or land, but in the lives they had touched and the love they had shared. As they grew older, they spent more time simply being together, no longer needing the bustle of activity to fill their days. They would sit on the porch that Isaiah had expanded over the years, watching the sun set over the mountains and talking about everything and nothing. "I have been thinking," Isaiah said one evening when they were both 70, "about how my life could have gone so differently. If I had stayed in Missouri, become a banker like my father wanted, I would have had money and status, but I would have been miserable. Coming to California, living alone in these mountains, that gave me peace, but it was still a solitary kind of happiness. Then you came along, and suddenly everything made sense. The solitude had been preparation, I think, teaching me to be comfortable with myself so I could be a good partner to you. And my struggles in Philadelphia, trying to fit into a mold that was never right for me, that prepared me too," Beatrice agreed. "It taught me to value freedom and authenticity. When I came to California and met you, I was ready to embrace a different kind of life. We found each other at exactly the right time. We did." In 1902, they celebrated their 31st anniversary quietly, just the two of them. Their children had wanted to host a party, but Beatrice and Isaiah had requested a simple evening alone instead. They had dinner by candlelight, with Beatrice wearing a dress she had made from the last of her finest silk and Isaiah in a suit he claimed was too fancy for everyday but wore anyway, because it pleased her. After dinner, they danced in the parlor to music only they could hear, moving slowly to the rhythm of their own hearts. Isaiah held her close, and Beatrice rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat that had comforted her through 3 decades of marriage. "I love you, Beatrice Ashford," Isaiah murmured into her hair. "From that first day with the berry basket until my very last breath, you will be the love of my life." "And you are mine," she whispered back. "My mountain man, my protector, my home." They swayed together as the candles burned low, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded every dream. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, but inside the cabin, love continued to bloom and grow, as fresh and vital as it had been 31 years ago. The years that followed were gentle ones. They watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren, each new addition to the family a source of joy. The ranch continued to thrive under Isaac's management, and Beatrice's pattern business remained profitable, though she had turned most of the day-to-day operations over to Bethany. They took shorter walks now, not venturing as far into the mountains, but the berry patch remained a favorite destination. Every summer, they would make the trip together, picking berries just as Beatrice had done on that fateful day so long ago. Sometimes grandchildren accompanied them, and Isaiah would tell the story of how he had found their grandmother trespassing on his land. "I knew right away she was special," he would say, winking at Beatrice. "So I told her she could come back anytime. Best decision I ever made." In the summer of 1907, when they were both 75, Isaiah woke one morning to find Beatrice already up and dressed, standing by the window and looking out at the mountains. "You are up early," he said, joining her and wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I was thinking about our life together," she said, leaning back against him. "About how extraordinarily blessed we have been. 4 wonderful children, 12 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren so far, a successful ranch and business. But most of all, we have had each other. Every single day for 36 years I have woken up loved. Do you know what a miracle that is?" "I do," Isaiah said softly, "because I feel the same way, You have made every day of my life better just by being in it." She turned in his arms and kissed him, a kiss that held all the love and passion of their decades together. "Let us go pick berries today, like we used to." "It is a long walk, Beatrice." "I do not care. I want to go back to where it all began." So they made the journey, moving slowly but steadily up to the berry patch. It took longer than it used to, and they had to stop several times to rest, but eventually they reached the spot where they had first met. The bushes were still there, still laden with fruit, and they picked together in comfortable silence. "Thank you," Beatrice said suddenly. "For what?" "For telling me to pick more berries. For not sending me away. For giving me a chance." Isaiah set down his basket and pulled her close. "Thank you for being brave enough to come back. For taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about courting a lady. You knew everything that mattered." They stood there among the berry bushes, holding each other and remembering all the years that had brought them to this moment. The sun was warm on their shoulders, birds sang in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sounds of their family continuing the legacy they had built together. "I would do it all again," Isaiah said. "Every single moment exactly the same." "So would I," Beatrice agreed. "So would I." As they made their way back down the mountain, baskets full of berries and hearts full of love, neither of them knew that this would be their last visit to the berry patch together. Isaiah would pass away peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 78, with Beatrice holding his hand and whispering that she loved him. She would follow him a year after that, at 79, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had learned from her example what it meant to love deeply and live fully. But on that summer day in 1907, they were simply two people who had found each other against all odds and built a beautiful life together. They had started with berries and an apology, and from that simple beginning, they had created a love story that would be told and retold by their descendants for generations to come. The ranch would continue to thrive, passed down through the family. Beatrice's pattern business would eventually become a successful clothing company run by her granddaughters. But more importantly, the values she and Isaiah had lived by kindness, generosity, hard work, and abiding love would echo through their family tree. Years after they were both gone, when someone would ask the family elders about Isaiah and Beatrice Ashford, the response was always the same. They were two people who understood that love was not about grand gestures or perfect moments, but about showing up every day with an open heart and a willingness to build something beautiful together. And it had all started with a young woman picking berries on a mountain man's land, an apology on her lips, and his simple response that would change both their lives forever. Pick more, always. The story of their love became legend in San Pedro and the surrounding mountains. Parents told their children about the mountain man and the seamstress who had found each other in the berry patch, using their story as an example of how the smallest kindnesses could lead to the greatest joys. Young women picking berries would sometimes whisper hopes that they too might find their own Isaiah, a strong and gentle man who would see their worth and cherish them completely. Young men would aspire to be like him, protective and devoted, understanding that true masculinity meant using one's strength to shelter and support rather than dominate. The cabin that Isaiah had built and expanded over the years remained in the family, carefully maintained and preserved as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors could still see Beatrice's sewing room, with the table Isaiah had crafted positioned to catch the light. They could sit in the rocking chairs on the porch and imagine two people who had sat there thousands of evenings, holding hands and watching the sunset. The berry patch, too, became something of a shrine. Family members tended it carefully, ensuring that the bushes remained healthy and productive. It was traditional for couples in the Ashford family to visit the patch on their wedding day, picking berries together and remembering the love that had started their legacy. In the end, Isaiah and Beatrice's story was proof that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the most ordinary moments. A woman picking berries, a man offering kindness instead of anger, two lonely souls finding exactly what they needed in each other. They had taken that simple beginning and transformed it into a lifetime of love, building not just a family but a legacy of devotion that would inspire generations. They had shown that love was not about perfection, but about choosing each other every single day, through hardships and triumphs, through youth and old age, with unwavering commitment and endless grace. And somewhere in the mountains above San Pedro, where the berries still grow thick and sweet every summer, the spirit of their love remains, eternal and unchanging as the land itself.